I think there's something about being watched that makes it very tempting to perform. When you're being watched, you want to put on a show, you want to entertain. But like Aries said in Meanwhile and Honeydew, this ain't just about entertainment. There's a reason why we yap, there's a reason why we speak, and sometimes yapping and speaking is meaningless because sometimes connection happens over a bridge, of nothingness, and all there is really is to talk about the weather, the birds, and the price of bread. But sometimes, when you're being watched and it's tempting to put on a performance, it's important to ask yourself why. What separates the performer, Thandeka, from the performance, the act, and the authentic self that represents who I am. So what is my authentic self? My authentic self is who I really am. Right now I'm chilling here on Wallow. The name of this couch is Wallow. Got it at an auction and it's moved around with me. My friend Nellis and I, we named it Wallow when we were living together. So I'm sitting on Wallow. Maybe I'm wallowing, but I don't think so. But I just think my words have finally come together. So I'm here to yap. So what am I yapping about today? Oh wait, did I tell you my name? But I'm sure you saw, but my name is Thandeka. A lot of people call me T. The first person to call me T though was my late aunt Ndombikaise Malaza. And ever since then, it's become a term of endearment. Growing up, people used to call me TK. I think it's very common if your name is Thandeka for people to call you TK. But TK, all TKs aren't Thandekas. All T's aren't Thandekas. So the name by which I am called is Thandeka. And today's yap session, today's few minutes yap, is titled The Parade of the Performance. Now, initially I had said to myself, I'm going to just have a podcast episode talking about the parade of the performance. But of late, I've started feeling strange, speaking to myself or engaging with myself. And I think because I've become so much more conscious of what I'd call the outside presence. Okay, so like that there is someone ultimately who is going to listen to this product. Ultimately, there is someone, also please note the term product. There is someone who's going to engage with this, and I want to kind of sort of maybe not even guide but preempt their engagement and how they would likely feel or engage with the material, and whether or not it is quote unquote politically correct to be using some terms or certain phrases and wording as I am trying to communicate certain ideas. And viewing whatever we want to express or what we want to say as a product, a sellable product at that, I think also was a confirmation of maybe the timing and the word that I've received to sort of highlight or speak about the period of the performance. So I started this conversation off and I said, it's so tempting to perform there when you know you're being watched, or at least when you've got a feeling that someone is watching me. Two things can happen. You can either shrink away and hide, not 2, 3, or you can stand in your truth and be like, whether they're watching or not really doesn't really change the direction I was going to take with anything I'm going to do next. Or 3, you say, I love an audience, I shine when people are watching me. I am most comfortable, actually most excited when I'm the center of attention, when I am being listened to, when my monologues take precedence over everyone else's thoughts in the room. I become perhaps the greatest performer that I am, and maybe that performance also becomes my identity. So imagine this being watched, but now think about it in terms of whether you're sitting in a movie cinema, or you're sitting in a theater, or you're sitting in a crowd listening to a speech, or you're listening to music. And the performance and the performer perhaps are a bit tricky to separate, because when I represent something, I embody it, right? For a movie to feel the way that it feels, and for us to be able to watch it all the way through, is because the people who are on screen have taken classes that make it look effortless. You know, it makes it look real. Sometimes it takes you a while to remember that there's someone behind the camera going, "Cut, this is not real." But because of how everything is represented and told to us as a story, it becomes believable, right? So the better you are at acting, the better you are at representing an idea, or like selling an idea to someone, or selling a story even, to say that, hey, listen, this is something that is real, it's believable, it's plausible. And then, it becomes synonymous. So when you think about the character of Harry Potter, you have an idea in mind, a set idea, even though that's not the character that J.K. Rowling perhaps wrote in the book. But whenever you imagine Harry Potter, we see the same person, because the acting was that great. It was that relatable. It made us believe in alternative universes, and maybe we found, this way of alternative universes differently as, we moved along the line and changed and grew over time. So, you sit and you watch in the cinema, and it's believable, but at the end of the day, it ends, right? It's 1 hour, 30 minutes, great movie, great storyline, great plot, cinematography is top-notch, sound is amazing. But at the end of the day, everybody takes off their acting face and they go home, and when they're home, they don't have to have an accent that they've practiced for the movie. They don't have to perhaps stick to the diet that they had to take before taking the role, because that was a job, that was an act, that was something that I was executing to get somewhere. But the real me, though I may share some traits with the character, is not exactly as you were shown, okay? Now that's on a large scale. That's employment, that's money, that's Hollywood, that's Bollywood, that's cinema, that's everything everywhere. But then you also take a step further with this analysis and you say, okay, if there's a stage and I'm acting, right, and people pay to see me act, then it's easy for us to identify that as a performance, because I'm paying to see it, I am simply paying for the feeling of witnessing something perhaps that I wouldn't have been able to witness in a certain or specific environment. And the certain and specific environment then is curated, it's designed, it is meant to provide a certain feeling. So for instance, if researchers show and prove that the color yellow makes people feel happy or at peace or joyous, then a good researcher in a film production would ensure to put yellow on the walls or on the couch or something in a scene that tries to connect the reader to a feeling of peace, because that's sort of like the cultural expose that you'd receive, prior to planning your production or releasing it, right? And productions take time, because an act takes time to perfect, right? For us to not see it as an act, it means it must become almost married to who you are. It must be something that you then embody, become, or able to represent, for us to be able to say, whoa, that was a stellar performance. That was 10 out of 10 in China, no crumbs, 8 and left nothing. That's the level, that's the time, that's the art, that's the investment. And when you take away the professionalism and you strip everything down, and then you think about the stage as our cell phones. Okay, you think about the stage as social media, and on social media we all have a username. Okay, username X, username Y, username Z. This is a unique identifier for an individual in this setting. Okay, imagine Squid Games. Imagine all of us, or the individuals that have been called to play this game. Social media, different varying platforms, YouTube, Spotify. Everyone is, we're all together in this place. Now, in order for you to grab, right, this attention, that would sort of be related then to money. So you remember how initially we started with the conversation about movies, cinemas, theaters, because you're paying to see an act, right? And that's a product. It takes perfection. It needs to be sold. Somebody needs to buy it. People need to watch it. People need to enjoy it. So I have designed it in such a way that it would tick at least the majority of those boxes, while still telling a relevant story, right? It's something that I decorate, something that I design, color grade, change, effects, edit to present a certain idea. Now you come onto the stage of social media, and that's when we also begin to sell ourselves, sell our opinions, sell our ideas, sell our creativity, sell our usability, sell our brilliance. Because if I do not then design Thandeka 2.0, who is not only as awesome as I am, but awesomer, okay? If I can present, if I can portray, if I can design and curate her in such and such a way, then becomes more sellable. She becomes more brandable, her identity in this reality of virtuality becomes real, almost married to her own self. Now, actors, actresses, production specialists, everyone who's in production, everyone who sells a product goes home and takes a break. But if you are existing in this virtuality of constant production, constant selling, and we're all the same crowd, it means you're only able to sell something when you can grab attention the most. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the algorithm. Hold on, let's take a sip of this tea. I'm sure you've heard this idea of the algorithm. And what it is essentially is a formula that slots some variables in. And based on those variables that it slots in, then your visibility increases, decreases, stays the same, relatively the same, or not. So it means A, you must market yourself constantly. And marketing yourself constantly, and what has happened over time is that you need to curate this marketing, okay? So things like scheduling content, things like maintaining consistency, things like being able to deliver, things like being able to brand yourself very well, become this KPI scoring model in an attention economy that doesn't really focus so much so on what you do, but how you're able to position yourself to do that thing. So because we're all trying to make money, it becomes oftentimes more and more and more and more a performance, a play. Because if I know that to make it into Hollywood, I must do A, B, C, D, study here, do this, eat like this, dance like that, study 10 languages, if I know the formula, if I know the formula for writing a short story to keep the reader entertained, to keep the reader engaged, it means that I start applying a formula to my own personal life as well. So what does that mean? It means whenever I'm going out for lunch, I must go out for lunch in a place that encapsulates the brand that I have become. So much so that I think that a lot of restaurants don't even invest in good chefs. They don't invest that much in good food anymore, because the budget for being a restaurant must be split between the aesthetic compilation of that restaurant as well as the quality of food being sold. So if you're trying to be a profit-making business, you will compromise on one or the other, depending on the target market you're trying to reach. But if your clients continuously come in carrying cameras and want to shoot the place, then you need to make it look great. Now, there's always nuance involved in analyzing statements, and I'm not going to say what I'm saying and explain what I'm saying, but there's limitations to everything. Now, I'm not here to say people shouldn't take pictures of restaurants, because hey, all of us are one way or another trying to get our money in this economy. I'm sitting here recording this video, but you don't know what I do offline. So it then becomes, I guess, an analysis of how we continuously are stuck in a performance, so much so that sometimes we refuse to acknowledge the fact that we might have been bamboozled. You know, we reject the evidence of this bamboozle. We go online and we form friendships. There's nothing wrong with forming friendships online, but how much of that person do you see is actually real? You know, if I post on social media that I work out 6 times a day, you have no way of knowing whether that's true or not. You know, I could be telling you that, or I could just have really great genes. But in order for me to get the part of a X amount of money to be able to sell you a product, or myself, or my body, or the way that I look, maybe all I have to do is exist and show everybody that I am the standard. And who benefits then from paying me to live like that and show you how I'm living? So it always makes me wonder, you know, how am I supposed to act normal when there's a camera in my face? There's a camera in my face right now, and this is not how I talk to myself. I talk to myself a lot, you know, but there's a camera in front of me, and if you're constantly surrounded by this camera, how much of what you say is what you think, and not what you need to say to make sure that you stay relevant enough to be able to keep doing this, not for fun, not because you enjoy discourse, not because you enjoy portraying your life, but because genuinely, sincerely, in order for you to make your next meal, you need to be able to curate and sell a specific idea, you know, that goes with the script, that goes with the formula. And I think ultimately this leads to 3 main things. 1, a lack of critical engagement with form and what has become content. 2, a lack of authenticity, you know, and dedication to ideas and a commitment to see things through. And 3, the increase was an increase in the quality we place on sound bites, you know, things that sound good, not really focusing on the context of things that are said and the importance of words and meaning of things on all their linguistic levels. I think, yeah, I'll make an example of this, and the one example that I want to make is something that is called slacktivism. And slacktivism is essentially protest, but protest online, like online media as a form of protest. And what this is, you know, like resharing posts, letting people know what's going on, sharing an info slide about something. And this in and of itself is great, you know, because it's a community of sharing knowledge. A lot of people perhaps wouldn't know that things were happening in the world if they weren't online, if they didn't see people's tweets, if they didn't see, you know, posts on Instagram. And it's important because it's sort of like people sharing knowledge, you know. Let's not focus on who controls the data for now. We'll get there. It's still part of the performance conversation. But when we're all in the same place and we feel like we can trust each other, it's a way of sharing communication. And communication is good, you know, because then you're able to know what's really going on in the world, what means what, and why this is important. But you know, if you're going to share a post then about the number of gender-based violence cases a year. Now, whenever I speak for when if I've done it before, I'm not calling myself better than anyone watching this. But this is an important conversation, you know, that I think we need to have as young people and a society that wants to change what is currently happening for the better. To say if I share a post about, you know, gender-based violence and who to donate to or what to do, and then the next post is a picture of my Burberry flavored ice cream, and then the next is my favorite track from today, and then the other one is a quote about how it's important for you to love yourself because nobody ever will, you know. I think it's possible to hold all of those thoughts, you know, in one day. But how do you separate the amount of attention that you would give a post about gender-based violence and a post about your strawberry slushy ice cream? And are we putting things there as a means of a public gallery to say, oh, this is what I've been up to today and this is what it looks like? And when we're doing that, perhaps we're not even necessarily performing, we're just, you know, showing everyone what we like. But when does activism become performative? And how do we change things from performative to authentic, right? Do we just simply embody it? Because surely as a person you can't care about every single terrible thing going on in the world. Or do we become more honest about it and say, you know, these are conversations that I want to have in my community. You know, I want to have and hold debates about this so I can understand this idea better. I want to attend lectures. I want to learn more. And this is what I meant about critical engagement, is when you see what has happened in Palestine, for instance, over the last year, you have learned so much from just seeing other people's posts, but how much work have you really done in reading? How much work have you really done in research? How much work have you really done in donating and contributing, in writing, in thought, in engagement with your peers? Or does it simply just end with a hashtag? And is a hashtag powerful enough? Or do we need to start backing our ideas and our beliefs with real action, you know? Separate the performance from the authenticity. Say, hey, thank you for sharing this. We appreciate it. And here's the next step. We are going to we're going to convene where to have discourse about this at 6 p.m. And instead of watching something that is funny and calming, you actually show up, you know. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't share. It's just a question, you know, to say, at what point do we become more authentic to who we are? And if that's a part of authenticity, then what's the difference between someone who knows what I post online and the real me? And if there's no difference, then does it mean that all my learned behaviors can be replicated by the next individual, and so on and so forth? Now, secondly, you know, this idea of a lack of connection. You know, when I am performing in a show as Rapunzel, okay, and the person I am acting with, the prince, is someone that I have to fall in love with, I have to perform my love for this prince. I must act, you know, because I'm going to get paid for it. And how that has sort of even translated into modern day society, where we, you know, don't entertain individuals who can't afford our entertainment. So, you know, you're not worth my time if you can't give me 3,000 to go do this and this and this. Is it even a real relationship if she doesn't buy you this and this and this and this? This constant payment of our existence, this constant I must be paid, this constant I must be seen, this constant I must be, is what has disintegrated us at the community level. I was reading an article the other day, or was I listening to a podcast? But it was about the disappearance of third spaces. And third spaces are essentially places where people just go out and connect, you know. We're so connected in this world of virtuality, restaurants and groove, that it's very rare for people to say, oh, you know, I went out and I met this person in real life. You know, there wasn't a pre-plan where we connected on Instagram and I was like, oh, I'll see you there, let's link up, I'll be wearing this and this and this. But the genuine warmth of meeting another human being for the first time and being intrigued genuinely and not wanting to post that cool moment on your Instagram story, that is also probably why festivals and events don't even feel the same anymore. Parties, because it's the phone entertains me more. You know, whatever's on my music listening device is better than the conversation that's happening here. Whatever this is, it's better than, you know, I can always please myself better. I can always do this better. This has even creeped into, you know, our intimate relationships where, you know, I'll just perform love and let it go, let it pass. I don't even know what this love is, but because Hollywood represents it as such, then I will fall into it. So, you know, ultimately I just think we're at a place where every time we do something, we need to check whether we're pretending, performing, or being true to who we are. And when we're able to check this, it becomes less important, you know, who's watching and who's not, because you know that even if no one's watching, you would dance, and even if someone is watching, you're still dancing, because who you are doesn't change on the environment that you're in. It doesn't change based on the money that you'd be receiving to compromise your true identity in pursuit of this check, you know. There's no contract, but if you're selling things for free, like if you want to present yourself as someone who reads but doesn't, why don't you just actually do the reading so you can become a person who does read, you know? Who are you acting for and why are they so important? I think these are questions, you know, even when it comes to my relationship with content, the one that I shared in the beginning, and being like, oh, I'm finally going to write this for someone so it can be published. But why is that important? Why shouldn't I just write anyway? You know, write as if the only individual who has to deal with this is myself. And letting the audience decide when they see it whether it's worth viewing or not. And not being so horny on attention, you know, so wild for, I want the satisfaction, this constant validation that people must like, people must enjoy, people must subscribe, people must agree even, you know. I can never be wrong. I think that's foolish, and it makes us dull, makes us unable to really open up to experiences and to people and to thought, you know. People don't agree with you if you don't agree with them, and that's led to what we call cancel culture. Your opinion is wrong, you know, and it's okay. I think that's a conversation for another day, but what's to say you know it all, and what does it say about you as a person if you can't listen to another person without getting offended, without wanting to cancel them and never hear from them again? Things making you uncomfortable doesn't mean they shouldn't exist. They just exist to make you uncomfortable. And perhaps you only know the truth when you hold it up to the light, okay? You only know whether your opinion holds water if you share it and people say, hi, that's not the one, I'm sorry. And you're like, why? They poke holes in your argument, and you think about your holes and you say, well, maybe that's a stand I'm willing to take. Maybe regardless of everything that's been said, that's what I believe in. Critical engagement, having a spine, something straight you can rely on. I actually think I hurt my gym yesterday. Yeah. Stressed. Anyway, that's my yap on the parade of the performance. I hope you got something from all of that. Ciao.